We all have challenges in life: sadness, broken relationships, anger, bullying, grief, and isolation. But there is hope. Together, we can learn how to bring back joy, re-engage with life, restore relationships, and to be alone without being lonely. Welcome to Psychology Talks.
Welcome back. We are here with Dr. Susan Stuntzner, and she's going to be talking with us today about resilience. So tell us some about resilience. What is it, and how do we have it, and how do we use it, and all of that stuff?
All right, my pleasure. So resilience is often understood as the ability to bounce back, kind of get back to a status quo of what somebody used to know or a place they used to be. Resilience is often understood and defined as something people have when they go through a life-altering event or some difficulty. Okay, so I kind of joke with people, and I say, so how many of you think about resilience and building your resilience when life is going really well?
No one.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, who does that? Yeah.
and usually it gets a few people to kind of chuckle and go, oh yeah, she's right, Yeah. So it is one of those things, it's a great skill to have, but it is one of those approaches to life and living that people may not think about until they're going through something challenging or something that's not as they would hope it would be. Okay. One of the things I really like about resilience that I think is important to start off with is, there's this bit of a debate, scholarly debate, about is a person born resilient or is it something they can acquire and cultivate over time? Okay. So let's kind of snuff that out a little bit because it usually comes up. So with resilience, yes, some people will probably come into this world a bit more gritty and resilient, just biologically how they're made than others.
Right, so it goes back to that old nurture versus nature and personality and how much of it do you have when, before you're born or, all of that. And as a mother, I can tell you that my children definitely came into this world with different personalities.
Absolutely.
So not even as a professional, but as a mother, I can tell you, they came into this world with very different personalities and very different capabilities. Right. So we all have a spectrum.
Right.
And so
there's maybe a little bit of variation in how people enter the world. But one of the selling points for myself and what got me really excited about it, and I think can get others excited, what I've witnessed gets other people excited, is that it can be cultivated. So to be resilient doesn't require you to be a certain way.
Yeah.
To be born a certain way. So regardless of your starting point, it can be improved upon, it can be learned, and it can be cultivated. Another thing that is important, I think, for people to know is that resilience ebbs and flows. So there are some people who will say, yeah, Susan, I'm resilient, I got that. I'll say, well, that's great.
Yeah.
But it's like lifting weights. If we don't keep working on resilience and being mindful of it and actively doing something to keep it at the level we'd like, it's not as strong. It kind of wanes.
Yeah, and that goes with a lot of our skills, right? A lot of the skills that we teach in the psychological world or the mental health world are those skills that it takes a while to learn. It takes a while to incorporate them and get them into practice where we can do them without thinking about it. But then there are those times in life when it can't just be automatic. Once we've learned them, it can't just be automatic. It can't just stay automatic. But it has to be one of those things where we have to intentionally think about it. We have to intentionally use it so that the skill continues to stay robust.
Right, and to be automatic when we need it.
Right, yeah.
So people can be resilient, but then if they don't keep working at it,
can falter.
Yeah, it can. Like I say, ebbs and flows, kind of comes and goes. So with that said, resilience is something that benefits everybody. A lot of the work that I have done and that I do with people does center around the world of living with a disability and how to deal with situations in the context of disability. But I certainly let everybody know it's good for everybody.
Absolutely. It doesn't matter what walk of life you're from or what your circumstances are. If you don't have some capacity for resilience, then you're going to have life events that kind of knock you down, and it might be difficult to get back up.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you said that, Angela, because there's this exercise I do with people. You know, I kind of like to have fun with groups and whatnot. And I say, so how many of you have ever been through a situation, without getting too personal, that you can think of where prior to that life event, you thought, I got this. I'm a good coper. Easy peasy.
Yeah.
Then something happens and every skill you ever had is not working. And I usually get a few hands out of that, you know, and I say, I can guarantee if you've ever been through such an experience, you will not forget it.
Right.
So then it brings us to the role of resilience. It's not just about whether you're resilient or not, it's also about the number of skills and the type of skills you have.
Tell us more about that.
So I explain to people that building resilience can be like a menu.
Okay.
You know how you go into a menu and you have a list of entrees to choose from. When we talk about building resilience, there will be skills or approaches people use. Some of them you like, some of them you don't. Some of them you're like, well, I'll kind of think about that one. But the more skills or items on your menu that you have to choose from, the better your chances are of being resilient.
What might some of those items be? What would that menu look like?
So it's going to be somewhat individually tailored because what works for one person may not work with somebody else. But, you know, to give you an idea, things may include social support, family, people's attitude and outlook on life, perseverance, grit, spirituality, forgiveness, compassion, self-compassion, coping skills, hardiness, appreciation for life, finding meaning.
Yeah. So one thing that I can think of is self-identity and how stable that is. So when I think about, you know, difficult times and messages we might take from that, and, you know, I go through, let's say, a bad situation at work. And then I start to feel like I'm a bad employee or I'm a bad, I'm a psychologist. So let's just say psychologist. I'm a bad psychologist because, you know, that technique didn't work for that patient or whatever it is in people's own lives. So they take that message and then that message sticks.
Right.
Instead of saying, that's absolutely not true. And going back to what their actual, if their self-concept is more stable, I know that I'm a good psychologist.
Right.
That technique didn't work for that person because it didn't work.
Right.
So we'll try a different one. So attributing whatever the circumstance is, I had a car accident, I tripped and broke my leg, I ran out into the street without looking and got hit by a car, whatever it is. I mean, there can be terrible situations that happen in life, right? But if we have a more stable self-concept and we're able to use some of these other techniques like what you're talking about, that I, you know, have people in my life that can speak into it, that can tell me and remind me who I am.
Right.
they're able to see me over time and say, you are one of the most loving people I know. You are very kind, and I get to witness in you how you treat people, and that inspires me. So there's all those types of things that you talked about with having people in our lives, with having the ability to look at our circumstances over time to define what's going on versus just one little segment in our day or in our week, or maybe it's even a year.
Right.
Sometimes the bad situations last a long time.
Yeah, they can. And I think when something is ongoing, it can feel overwhelming.
Absolutely.
And I think that's maybe when people get more discouraged. So, a key part of resilience is not just what's working, but being able to be honest with yourself about what's not working.
Yeah.
And asking yourself, if I'm not getting the results that I want or need to cope better or to work through this situation, am I willing to try something different? Which brings us back to the menu of skills.
Yeah.
When you've got a larger menu, you have many more things to draw from. And it may be that certain skills and approaches work for some situations, but that same skill or approach will not work as well for something else.
Absolutely. So once someone knows what their menu looks like, they know what those coping mechanisms are to help them have resilience, then how do they put them into practice?
Well, I think it's about being mindful and intentional. I tell people that building resilience is a purposeful and an intentional process. That it's kind of like asking yourself, what do I need in this situation? Okay. And if something's not working, what else can I do?
So it takes a lot of self-awareness.
Or the willingness to develop that. Okay, it doesn't mean, for resilience to work, it doesn't mean you have to be self-aware in its finest, extent. But what it means is that you're willing to travel that journey, to ask yourself the difficult questions and to not beat yourself up when something doesn't work. Because what I tell people is that even when we try something out or we learn something about ourselves we don't particularly like, I'm going, that's great. And they're like, what are you talking about, Susan? Because now we can try something else. It's good to know what's not working for you.
Yeah. So seeing something that's not working, not so much as a failure as an opportunity, though.
Right.
An opportunity to try something different, an opportunity to learn something about themselves or the situation or about how they operate in a situation.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I really like about resilience is when people really understand it, it's very empowering. It's like flipping that switch that says, I can do something. I can affect change in my life. And once people get that, it's a beautiful process. It's just great to watch it unfold.
Yeah. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about you talked a little bit earlier about some of the research in resilience and what type of person is best able to use resilience, or what ways can anyone then develop it?
Well, I think, and I'm going to just kind of draw on my personal experience and a few things that I've figured out. I think resilience is useful for everybody, okay? But I think people are really receptive to it sometimes when they're really uncomfortable. Maybe their anxiety is really high, or they're really depressed, or just really frustrated that what they've been doing isn't working, and I got to do something. Okay. And so a part of resilience is also about having a willingness, you know, to try something else. And so it's not so much what people are going through as people have at least enough of an understanding that I don't like how this is going and I want better.
Okay.
And so when I've worked with people early on, when I'm helping them understand what resilience is and how improving resilience in one part of our life transcends to other parts, one of the first questions I ask people is, so what does better look like?
That's a great question.
I know.
Yeah.
And what I learned through this process, initially through some research I did, people would say, you know, Susan, I don't know. Nobody's ever asked me that question. And to me, that was such a defining moment because I suppose due to my set of experiences, I asked that question a lot. And so to be working with people who say, no one's ever asked me that, it made me very sad.
Yeah.
You know, but then I'm like, well, I'm asking you that question. What does better look like for you?
Right.
And let's talk about that.
So what people can do in their own everyday life is to ask themselves that question and then really honestly look at the answer and evaluate, would that really make the situation better? Or is that kind of wishful thinking that maybe if I take it out to its full conclusion wouldn't necessarily make it better? Because I'm sure there's a lot of that too.
Yeah, but when I say what does better look like, I'm challenging people to think about it kind of broadly, like from where you are today, if you were to just reflect, because there's a lot of power in reflection, to think about what you would like different in your life and what you're willing to do, to kind of sit with that and, you know, kind of put some of those pieces together, knowing that the concept of better will change.
Okay.
It's not an end point, it's more a goal. And as you work on resilience, your idea of better becomes enhanced and more crystallized.
Okay.
And so it's kind of like a moving target.
Okay. Yeah. So the better is a goal, but how we're going to get there, that's not necessarily, we're not trying to figure that out necessarily. We're just looking at the end goal and saying, this is where I want to be. And having some flexibility to say, okay, this might change over time. How I get here, I might have many different paths to get here.
Absolutely.
But this is where I want to be.
Absolutely. And so one thing I try to help people understand with resilience is there's more than one path.
Yeah.
What works for you may look a little different than somebody else. So it's really important to not get caught in that comparison trap. Well, they did this, so I need to try that. No, this is your journey.
Yeah. So recognizing that we're all individuals and how it looks for me and how it's gonna fit on me or how it's gonna be walked out in my life, very, very different from someone else next to me.
Yeah. And, you know, another thing I've learned is that for some people initially, it's easier to talk about what resilience looks like in somebody who they admire, maybe than identify it initially in themselves.
Okay. How do you get them to that point where they can start to see resilience? Not just, they might be experiencing it without recognizing it, but how do you help them to recognize what resilience looks like in themselves?
Well, again, based on my experience when I work with people, I really, a part of that has been teaching people specific resilience-based skills, you know, like cultivating social support, learning to forgive, building self-compassion, coping skills, locus of control, what can we affect change in, okay? And actively and intentionally working on these skills
Okay.
and applying it to our daily lives.
Okay. You just used a term that I want you to define for people. So what is locus of control?
So locus of control, kind of how I explain that to people, is there's an internal locus of control and an external locus of control. What really helps people is that internal piece. And what that means is, what do I believe, or do I believe that I can do something to effect change?
Okay.
So when we have a strong internal locus of control, people are saying to themselves and behaving in ways that they are doing something to create positive change or to try to.
Okay.
The external locus of control may be the person who says, it doesn't matter what I do, nothing will change.
Okay.
So they don't try to do something different.
Okay. So that person that maybe is depressed, that can't see a way out of the depression. So why try?
Right.
Because everything's just going to be the same. My life is still going to be horrible.
And so sometimes when we look at resilience, it's about breaking it down. It's not always about the big what is better. It might be what's better for today.
Okay.
And so some of those building blocks are like small steps. And people build a foundation of experiences. We're like, okay, that time when I tried that strategy to be less depressed, it did help.
Okay.
So maybe I'll take another chance and try this, whatever this is.
Okay. So part of that building of resilience, or recognizing it in yourself, is to be able to, like you talked about, being reflective. So looking back on those times in your life when things have worked, when there was something that did work, and then doing that again.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so it is recognizing what does work and what doesn't work. And if something doesn't work, this is where the humor comes in, because I tell people, if you keep doing something and it's not working, what are you going to get? You know, my humorous question is, so how's that working for you?
Right. Yeah.
And there's usually not very well, Susan.
Yeah. So learning the lessons from what works and what doesn't, and saying, you know, I'm going to let the experience be the teacher for me and how I go about that. And if it doesn't work, I'm not going to do it again. I'm going to maybe do something different. I'm going to let that inform my next decision instead of getting down on myself that it didn't work.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, so we're using our skills. We're being reflective. We're looking at our lives in regards to what works, what doesn't work. Are there other things that we can do to build resilience or to incorporate it into our lives?
I think, you know, tied to the first one, the point that you made, but having that willingness.
Okay.
I think where people get stuck is maybe when they evaluate something as good or bad. And resilience isn't good or bad, it's a learning journey.
Okay. So not judging it.
Absolutely.
So not judging the experience, or not judging the whatever it is.
Say you've tried a new skill or approach and it didn't work out the way you wanted. I mean, that's still useful information, because that's more than you knew before.
Okay. So
we don't have to beat ourselves up over that.
Absolutely.
We can try something else.
So we're not judging ourselves. We're not judging the experience. We're just saying what happened, happened. And now I'm going to take that and do something with it.
Right.
Okay.
And I think being curious, you know, like I said, resilience, when people really grab a hold of it, it's very empowering. So if you're willing to be curious about what's out there, you know, what does that better look like?
So not just keep it as a pie in the sky concept, but actually go for it.
Yeah. And one thing that I have found has been helpful, because when I try to help people understand about resilience, you know, that question comes up, so where do you want to start? And that may be too broad for some people. So what we found is helpful sometimes is picking one part of your life.
Okay.
Is it your personal life? Is it your family? Is it employment? Is it about adjustment to disability, self-advocacy? And focus on applying resilience and the skills to that. And what we have found is as that part of your life improves, there's that carryover effect. It goes to other parts of people's lives.
Okay. So the example that keeps coming to my mind is domestic violence, and how, what we're seeing in research is that there's a growing incident of domestic violence in people that are younger and younger. And so in early relationships, romantic relationships. So how I see what you're talking about being applied to that would be reflecting back on your own idea about yourself and your self-worth, and then using that to look at what it is that you would like to see come out of a relationship. And maybe it's not that relationship. So some acceptance of being able to evaluate the situation and saying, I'm not worth this kind of treatment. I'm better than this kind of treatment. And I'm going to make a difference. What I want to have in a relationship is someone who's going to love me and value me and treat me well.
Yeah.
And then being willing to look at, well, what are the ways that I can go about getting that?
Yeah.
And part of that might be to recognize that it has to start with me. I have to start with recognizing that I'm worth that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a part of what you said that came through my mind is, what does better look like for me?
Yeah.
And so if somebody is in that situation, the question may be, don't I want better for myself? And what can I do to help myself have a better life or a better relationship, even if it's not that same relationship?
Right. Yeah. So that's a lot of stuff that we unpacked today. And so thank you for that. Where can people go to find out more about resilience?
Well, there's more and more information coming out about it. I'm always a big fan of books. So, there's one that I've sometimes looked at. It's by Dana Horn. It's, I believe, called 10 Sanity Saving Tips it's actually for women with chronic illness, but I think it could be applicable to men as well. It's a little different approach, but when I first started working with resilience, I wrote a book about resilience. It's called Reflections from the Past, Life Lessons for Better Living. And it has 93 one-page skills that are embedded within like 10 different domains, like attitude and outlook on life, spirituality, personal growth, social support. And so within each of these areas are specific skills that talk about them. Then there's a little explanation about how does that relate to the experience of living with disability. And then it has like a thought reflection at the end. And so the idea is that people who read that have ideas, quick, easy to access ideas that are based on resilience.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I so appreciate you coming on and talking with us about this important topic today. And thank you for joining us. We were so glad that you decided to be a part of this discussion on resilience today. And we're hoping that you're able to incorporate some of these ideas into your own life.